morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here this morning to be talking to all of you about privilege and inclusion, and hopefully I'll be able to bring a bit of hope and joy back into your lives after David has destroyed any hope you had. So a little bit about me first of all. My name is Alex. I'm Alex WLH on Twitter, and there are links to my slides on my website as well. I'm a software developer at the Wellcome Trust in London, and if you were here last year, you might know that's a new thing for me. The conference last year was bookended by interviews before and after my interviews for the job that I ended up taking. And while I was applying for jobs last year, I noticed something. I noticed a very common pattern. Lots of jobs would ask me for things like a GitHub profile, a Bitbucket link, a Stack Overflow account, evidence that I was a real developer because I was doing programming work in my free time. And as it happens, I do a lot of open source work. I do have quite an active GitHub account, and people just sort of seek me out. And I realized that actually this sort of thing very heavily tips the table. Because if you're looking for things like GitHub or Stack Overflow, you're optimizing for the sort of person who has a lot of free time, who can afford to do work without financial compensation in their off hours, who doesn't have maybe children or a partner to look after. You're optimizing for people with lots of privilege, people who look like me. And I realised this is a way in which my privilege, the privilege that I enjoy, is really a lever that helps me. It's furthering my career. But I think we all know the tech industry has a few problems with diversity. Our makeup doesn't reflect the general population. Inclusive cultures tend to be better environments, deliver better products. So I started thinking about, well, how can I make my environment more inclusive? How can I, as a person with relatively high privilege, do things to make sure that my environments are more welcoming for everybody else? And so that's the practical question I want to ask you today. This question does not necessarily have a simple answer. It looks simple when I put it on slides. When you go up and do it, it's a bit more difficult. But I hope to give you some ideas that you can go away and implement today. I'm also expecting that if you are the sort of person who at a technical conference goes to a talk with the words privilege and inclusion in the title, you will likely be the sort of person people asks about this stuff. So hopefully also it gives you some tools and ideas that you can use when other people ask you questions. So what do we need to build an inclusive culture? Well, the thing I'm going to talk about today, I mentioned already, is privilege awareness. It's necessary, it's not sufficient, that's why I've drawn a squiggly arrow rather than a direct implication. But if we are more aware of our privilege and how that benefits us, I think that can help us to build a better environment for everybody. But first, we need to understand the difference between diversity and inclusion. These are two words that are often used together. They're often conflated to mean the same thing, but I think there's a really important difference between them. Now let's imagine that you were going to hold a party. I imagine, we're all very raucous partiers here at PYCON UK. So you're going to invite people. You're going to invite lots of people. You're going to invite maybe your friends, some people from your family, some people from work. And to do this, you send out some invitations. If you're old-fashioned, you'll write a letter, or you might send an email. And diversity is like making sure you invite lots of different people to the party. Your friends from far away, co-workers you don't see very often, family who live in another country. But then when it actually comes to holding the party, you need to recognise that different people need different things to really feel welcome. Maybe a family member has travelled a really long way to see you, so you make sure you spend time with them so they feel like the effort was worth it. Maybe one of your friends has a food allergy. You make sure there's food available at the party that they're able to eat. Maybe one of your co-workers doesn't drink alcohol, so you make sure you have soft drinks that they like to drink. Inclusion is about recognising that people have differences. It's about not trying to force everybody into one single model of the world. It's about having empathy with all the people who are coming. Diversity, this sort of just inviting people and not really doing anything to accommodate them, that's too easily and too often gained for PR stunts, to make us look good without actually really making a difference. Inclusion, having empathy with people, recognising that people are different, that's what makes a real difference. That's what actually can start to make our industry a better place. And so that's what I really want to talk about today. So now, let's talk about privilege. Privilege is a word that gets a lot of people defensive. People get very upset at the idea that you suggest that they might have privilege. Because when most people hear the word privilege, what they imagine is somebody who was born to billionaire parents, has a bed made of gold, and spends all day lying around not actually doing any work. And of course that's probably not most of us, we work hard for our success, right? So how could we possibly be privileged? We don't have wealth, we're not laid back. But privilege is not about being wealthy or laid back. And this common misconception is one of the most difficult things about dealing with privilege, because we don't realise we have it. We don't realise that we have privilege. All privilege is about is having certain benefits based on traits that you possess. It doesn't mean that you don't have to work hard. It doesn't mean that your success isn't guaranteed. It just means that there are certain things there's certain benefits you might have that might make your work easier than for somebody else who doesn't have those. Now, the way this manifests, and the definition I always like to use, is that having privilege means there are obstacles you don't have to deal with. And so you might work hard for your success, and that's very valid to do so. But somebody else who has the same successes might have had to work harder because there are more obstacles in their path. So a simple example, I'm a man, I have gender privilege, and so one obstacle that's not in my way is that people give me the benefit of the doubt. If I come to a conference and I'm talking to somebody for the first time, it's assumed that I'm technically competent, it's assumed that I know what I'm talking about. I've never been asked, are you another attendee's boyfriend? And I think a lot of the women in the audience would be able to tell us a story like that. So privilege is simply about having obstacles. It's about not having obstacles, sorry. Privilege is about not having obstacles that other people have to deal with. These are a couple of examples of the sort of privilege you might have. Now, some of these are things like race or gender or your family. These are things you're born with. Other things are things that change, develop over the course of your life, so maybe your mental health, your education, religion. So I want you all to look at this chart now. This is just a few examples of the way we experience privilege. And try to identify at least one privilege that you have. Maybe if you're white, you have race privilege. If you're cisgendered or you're male, you have gender or gender identity privilege. Maybe you've got a university degree, you have education privilege. So hopefully some of you will have most of these, some of you will only have one or two. And now I want you to imagine what your job would be like if you didn't have that privilege. What would be different for you? What would be harder? What would you have to change? Maybe if you're white, what if you didn't have your race privilege? What if you were trying to be a person of colour and attacking the street? Or if you're able-bodied, you're not in chronic pain, what if you didn't have your physical health privilege? What if it was significantly harder for you to move around? Or maybe if you've got a university degree, you've got education privilege, what if that was taken away? What if you were trying to navigate this industry as somebody who finished school at A-levels or even GCSEs? Hopefully you're starting to think about some of the ways your privilege might benefit you, some of the obstacles that might be there for somebody who doesn't have your privilege that you didn't even realise were there. Now, a lot of these things on these charts, these are not things we choose. Right? You don't choose to be born the race or gender you are, you don't choose your family. And so, it's not bad to have privilege. It's not bad to have privilege, because a lot of it is stuff that happened for you. There's a lot of genetic lottery. But I think it's bad to ignore the benefits it gives you. It's bad to ignore the fact that having your privilege means there are obstacles you don't have to deal with. You can't choose your privilege, but you can choose what you do about it. And so we're starting to see how, having privilege awareness, we can at least start to acknowledge the obstacles that other people might face that we might not. And we can see how those obstacles might stop people coming into our environments, whether that's a workplace, an open source project, a conference or meetup, how that might start to keep people out. So once we're starting to become aware of this privilege, how do we actually go about putting that into action? How do we turn this into practical, useful steps? The goal here is to be an ally for people who have different levels of privilege. It's natural human nature that we tend to bond with people who look like us, who are very similar to us, naturally people who share our levels of privilege. But it's much more powerful if we go out of our way not just to help people who look like us, but people who have different levels of privilege to us, people who don't look like us. And not only that, I want to say we don't just want to be an ally, we want to be an active ally. We want to be actually doing something. Thoughts, good intentions, feelings are great. I don't want to diminish them, but if everybody around the table is thinking good thoughts and does absolutely nothing about them, nothing really changes. So it's very important that we're not just thinking about this stuff, but we're actually doing it as well. So either what seems like what makes for a simple slice of a four-step process can be quite difficult in practice, but hopefully give you some ideas. The good news is, you've already done step one. First step is to introspect. It's the exercise we did by looking at the privilege and imagining what we have and imagining what it would be like not to have it. understand where your own privilege lies. Understand where you might be benefiting that you don't even notice. And a lot of the time, privilege is invisible. We don't realise we have it. But it's a really important exercise to step back and think, what are the things that I might benefit from? What advantages might I have that other people don't? So once you know where the gaps in your understanding are, the next step is to go and listen and learn. Find people who don't share your privilege and listen to them telling you what it's like to be a person without that privilege in the tech industry. It's very easy for us to do a thought exercise as privileged people in a room looking at a chart, sort of thinking about what it might be like, but we don't actually have to live with this stuff. For example, as a cisgendered man, I don't experience transphobia. Most of the time I don't even notice it. If I do notice it, it's because it's so incredibly blatant that how can I not miss it? And even then, most of the time I probably do. I didn't tell you what it's like to live with transphobia, to live with that crushing weight, to have to think about that every minute of every day because it's constantly bearing down on you. So if I want to know what it's like, I have to go and listen to a trans person. I have to go and listen to somebody who has a different level of privilege to me. So really go and listen to them, and as you listen to them, you'll start to learn things that you can do, things you can do to be a better ally. Now that might be things you can start doing. You know, you can go and support causes, give time, money, assets, start speaking up for certain things. It might also be in things you should stop doing. Something that has really changed for me in the last year or so is start to be much more aware of the language I use, for example. Start to be much more careful of words that I use because I listen to someone and say, well, that word that you think is innocent or jokey that actually has a harmful effect on me, it has stigma, please don't use it. And start to think about ways that I can cut my language. I want to say as well when I say listen here, really, listen. Do not have the this is sort of a great piece of advice if you're on social media. Read the replies before you reply yourself. It's very tempting for people to jump in when they're told, when somebody says, oh, well, you know, I experienced harassment at my job because I was a woman. If someone says that on Twitter, there will be 10 men in the replies telling her how that's not actually harassment and, you know, she's completely misunderstood. Don't be that person. If somebody says that something bad happened, believe them. There's no advantage to them for lying. Really do listen, just absorb it. Don't feel the need to jump in and show how smart you are. That's very important. And speaking of Twitter, if you don't have people of different levels of privilege in your daily life, Twitter is a great tool. You can go out there, find people who are different to you. There are lots of people who write about this stuff. And, you know, do go and start to absorb that experience and start to take on board what they have to teach, what they're talking about. So that's listen and learn. So now we've done a bunch of thinking. We've learned a bunch of stuff. But we want to be active allies. We don't just want to have good thoughts and intentions. So the next thing we need to do is we need to speak and to take action. We need to be an active ally. We need to take the knowledge we've learned and we need to put it in practice. So the first one I've already alluded to is cut out bad jokes and language. This is something you can do yourself. It doesn't require any intervention. But when somebody says to you, this language is harmful, or that joke actually isn't funny because it's making light of something, do listen to them. They're not trying to be the language police. They're not trying to. I was tempted to use the phrase grammar Nazi. That was very tempting. And then I realised actually making light of the Nazis that way can be, is something that I've been told can be harmful to people who did something like, at the hands of the Nazi population. So even there, I'm still having to think about it and catch it out of my language. It takes time to filter stuff out, but really do start being aware of that stuff and listen to people when they tell you that language use is harmful. And then start calling other people out on it as well. Start saying, if someone makes a sexist, if you're a man in a group of only men, and someone makes a sexist joke, call them out on it. Say, that's not okay, that's not funny, and this is why. There are a couple of reasons I think this is really important for us to do this as people of privilege, even if it might not actually directly affect us, even if we're not somebody who is affected by the harm done by that joke. One is that we can't put the burden of improving and detoxifying our industry on the shoulders of people who are marginalised. Because otherwise they end up doing two jobs. They do one job, which is the job they are paid to do, the job by which they are rated for salary, for advancement, for promotion. And they also do the job of having to fight back on stereotypes, on bad language, on discrimination. And that takes an inordinate amount of emotional labour, of effort, that they then can't put into the job that we actually judge them by. So it's really important that we're not just leaving that kind of fix the industry. The other thing is that the second thing is that people will often dismiss criticisms from groups they're not a part of. Or, if a woman, somebody might say, well, a woman is telling me about sexism, but women are oversensitive. Or a black person's telling me that I did a racist thing, but, well, all black people are angry. They dismiss the criticism. It's much more powerful when that criticism comes from not just the women, the black people, the marginalised groups in the room. And finally, a simple thing is that they may not, it's not always safe. For example, place where I work, we have lifts. Lifts are great. I can get to my third floor office without having to climb upstairs every morning. Aren't lifts wonderful? But I have male privilege. I don't think about the fact that a lift is not just a convenient means of getting from A to B, it's also an enclosed metal box. And for certain people, for certain groups, being an enclosed metal box they may feel vulnerable. They may feel threatened. They may not feel like it's okay to call somebody out on this, to call somebody out in that space. It's really important we call stuff out. And just as important that we carry on doing it when people who don't have that privilege are not around. It's not okay. So I'm going to call out sexist jokes when women are around, because then they'll see me and they'll see I'm in Alling and I'll get my cookie. But when they've all gone home, I'm just not going to bother because, frankly, who cares? It's important that we're continuing to represent people, to stand up these people, even when they're not around. So that's bad jokes and language. Another one is stereotypes. I already mentioned that, two common stereotypes: women are sensitive, black people are angry. Call out those stereotypes and make sure that people are not just falling back on lazy representations. This is another common one in next case I'm sure you're very familiar with. The character on the left, who is, notice that people almost always read this character as male, even though they have no identifying features. That's our male privilege. That's often male privilege shining through. That seems evidence that the individual on the left is bad at mathematics. The feminine coded character makes the same mistake. Obviously, all women are terrible at mathematics, and we can't possibly employ any of them. That's not really how it works. It's really important we push back on these stereotypes. Particularly as well, one problem I often see is if you have a team that's sort of very homogenous, they start to open up. We're going to hire our first woman developer, brilliant. And then they come in, and the culture's still very macho, it's very masculine, they're not a good fit, and they end up washing out or leaving quickly, and that's then seen by the team as evidence, well, women are just somehow incompetent developers, we couldn't possibly hire any more. And not a reflection that maybe their culture just wasn't suited, that they were perpetuating bad stereotypes, their culture wasn't ready for that. It's important to go back to stereotypes. And I want to point out as well, even stereotypes that seem positive or harmful. It's clear to see how saying all women are oversensitive is a bad stereotype, but saying, this is a really good point, that when you say women are naturally better at something as well, that can have just as harmful effect, because you're raising the work it takes them to get good at that stuff. You're not acknowledging the effort they might have had to take to get to that point. So it's really important to push back on this stuff. A really good tool I found for pushing back on stereotypes is to act like a small child and constantly ask, why? Why do you think that? Do you have information? Is that actually just a hunch? It forces people to actually examine this stuff, drag it out into the light. And finally, challenge the hidden assumptions in your environment. I've already talked about how privilege is often because we don't notice it. We also make a lot of assumptions into our environment, our workplace, into our community about the sort of things we're going to do. Maybe, for example, how many people in the room have daily stand-up meetings? Hands up. Quite a few. And I imagine if we were to ask around the room, stand-up meetings are going to be distributed around the day. Some people might have a morning stand-up, some people have an afternoon stand-up. My company, we do morning stand-up at 2:15 in the afternoon. But then there might be somebody who do morning stand-up at 8 a.m. in the mornings. Because that's a good time, right? You're all in the office, you're all awake, you've all had coffee, that's a great time, right? But what about the parent who has to take their child to work? Or the person who has to, or maybe the intern who's doing their paper round. Or somebody's got to travel a long distance to get to the office in the morning. It's important to think about the ways that our environment might inadvertently be keeping people out, even if it's not obvious how they're doing so. So those are some of the ways you can start to call people out, challenge them, push back on ways that your environment might not be inclusive. But I want to emphasize a couple of things. First of all, listening to someone is not the same as to having their experience. So it is fine for you to be an ally and say, well, I listened to, I don't know, I've read what non-binary people have to say about the way that, they are discriminated against, and this is what I've learned. But that is not the same as being a non-binary person and being directly discriminated against, or any marginalised group. And it's important not to try to co-opt their experiences. This can be a fine line to tread, but it's really important that you don't overstep that line and try to suggest that you actually understand what that discrimination is like. The second point that I think is important: practice empathy, not preaching. In going through this process, you will have empathy for people who are different to you. You will learn what it's like to see the world through their eyes, to be different. Don't then go out there and try and tell everybody else that you are the Messiah. You understand exactly what needs to be done, and you're going to tell them all how to do it. Help them come along for the ride. Help them understand. Point them at the resources that you learn from, so that they can learn the same way that you did. Going out there and sort of telling everybody what to do and having them listen to you is actually really often just another way of using your privilege to get your own way. And finally, I said this before, but again, calling out is powerful, especially when it comes from somebody who looks like us. It's an unfortunate aspect of the human condition that we tend to bond to people who look exactly like us, who share our privilege, but if you're a person of privilege, you can take advantage of that. And if the only person people in your company will listen to is an old middle-class white man, and you are an old middle-class white man, use that power. Go out there and don't just tell people about, the latest technical wisdom, but tell them about things they're doing that are bad as well. Tell them about how they're hurting the environment. So those are some ideas about how you can speak and take action. Final thing I want to say is persevere. This is not something you're all going to take back to your companies on Monday and go, BAM! Privilege awareness! And everything's fixed. It takes a long time. You've got to keep working on it. It's a process of gradual improvement. And as you go through, you'll find new ways to get better. You'll go back, you'll repeat the process, you'll learn new things, you'll learn what new ways you can take action. You'll have to keep going back and doing it over and over again. Now sometimes, you will get it wrong. You will screw up. I nearly did it just now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you learn from that. As long as you accept, okay, I screwed up. I'm sorry. You don't say those 2 words enough. I'm going to try not to do that next time. Accept that you will make mistakes and don't see those as evidence that you have to give up, but see it as evidence that you still have more to learn. And the thing is, we all have more to learn. I certainly don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody does. This is like any other technical skill that we might learn. You would never say, for example, that you've learned all of Python. There's nothing more you can learn about Python. There's always more to learn. There are always more areas you can go and explore, and it's constantly changing. It's a continuous process of improvement. There's always more to learn. So, persevere, push through it, and keep going back and learning and acknowledging that you still have more to go. So our goal was to become a more active ally to people who have different levels of privilege to us. And this is sort of the 4-step plan for doing it. Introspect, understand your own privilege. Listen to people who don't have the same privileges as you, and learn what makes it difficult for them. Learn what challenges they face. Speak up, take action, try to actually, bring about change to make your environment more inclusive for people, and finally persevere. Don't just give up at the first hurdle. Keep pushing on. This is a continuous process, but things can get better. And what will happen after all this? Well, 1 or 2 things will happen. Either things get better. Either you do actually start to see some improvement, things start to get better, and that's the outcome I think we'd all like to, help us. But sometimes things won't, and that's unfortunate. Some environments truly are toxic and unchangeable. But either way, after doing this, you have more information, and then you can use that to decide what you want to do next. But doing all of this, I've been trying to do more and more of this over the last year, and slowly, and it is slow, it is starting to change my little tiny corner of tech industry to start making it into the more diverse and inclusive place that I know we all want it to be. Thank you for listening.
Alex isn't taking questions today, unfortunately, but I guess you can get hold of him on Twitter.
Yeah, or come up and find me now.
Yep.
I'm around until Monday.
We've got tea and coffee downstairs now. Give it up for Alex.